Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Mark Sampson. Good morning to you, Mark.
Hey, Julian, how's it going?
It's going well, and it's good to have you on the show. And just to tell the audience a little bit about you, you are the chief at Belief, which is your own business consultancy company. And I love this tagline. I looked at your website. Look at this tagline. It says, relentlessly curious about the unique spirit that powers every great company. And that's something what we're going to be talking today about. We're going to be talking about exploring and sort of how to maintain that almost that organizational, that team spirit that started at the very beginning, and how do you maintain that in a position of when you're growing as a business, because often that sort of can be lost. We're going to talk about how we can sort of maintain that. But before we get into that, Mark, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
Interesting. Um, I would say helping others see what they're too close to see. So there's that old adage where it's hard to kind of read the label from inside the jar. And I feel like it's a privilege to be an objective outsider with a different perspective that helps individuals unearth truths and connect dots.
Fantastic. I love it. I love that analogy. You can't read a label inside a jar. That's a wonderful analogy and metaphor. It is so true. Very insightful, very profound. I love that. So we're talking about, I suppose, organizations or teams that have started and then they've grown and then they sort of potentially lose some of what they started. This could be a founder in a startup, just could be a startup within a team. And I think it might be relevant for you to just share your backstory, your origin story, because I think that has the sort of relevance to what we're talking about today.
Sure thing. Okay. So if you've ever been part of a company, whereas more people were added to the fold, so whether that's new employees or new clients, the business started to feel very different, in a way, kind of lose its sense of self. Well, that's my obsession. So why does that matter to me? Because I ended up feeling that way, basically working in a business where I felt like I didn't belong. Um, the difference was it was my own company. Now, I ended up leaving that business and taking far less than it was worth because it wasn't a place, Julian, where I wanted to be. And I like to say that we were financially successful, but philosophically broken.
Mm.
And I believe this happens to too many companies, that they're so focused on growing that they're often losing sight of who they're becoming. And that unique differentiating spirit basically becomes fuzzy, and founders can ultimately end up building a company that they actually grow to hate. So that's what I've now dedicated my time to helping others overcome.
Wow, that's interesting. You ended up hating your own company, which is well, no, because obviously people start. I'll often come out the corporate world or come out working something because they've got a passion for something and they want to start their own thing, and that's what motivates them. The fact that was lost and that was gone. I mean, that must be quite, you know, retrospectively devastating to think about that. You sort of, that journey of coming out of an organization and then suddenly you're hating your own business that you've created.
It was difficult. It was really challenging, right? And I think often the issue is we go into business, and I was young, and my business partner was young, and we kind of go into business because we're going to have a go. It's going to be fun. It's going to be great. It's going to be all rainbows. And what was really interesting is that people did buy into our backstory. Like we were a couple of young bucks just having a go. We didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And we actually ended up growing that company into one of IBM's largest and most successful resellers in its field globally.
Wow.
So you've got this accolade, but actually internally, the thing is fractured. And as more people were added, they were either siding with me or they were siding with my partner. Now, I've always been really clear in that it wasn't that he was right and I was wrong or vice versa. It's that we were different and that we never defined what our non-negotiable operating principles would be. And that was the thing that ultimately limited our growth and meant that one of us had to walk away.
And you think that's what causes organizations, when they start this growth and they start to lose the essence of who they are, is this they don't have these non-negotiables, the values. What is it? What's stopping the people maintaining that? Is it just it gets diluted in the size of people, number of people? Is it the messaging? Is it the leadership? There's a whole vast array of things. Is it, what have you found from your own experience, but also for the experience you're working with organizations now?
I think when you start something, there's the field, and in Silicon Valley talk, it's finding product market fit. So effectively, if you're a product-based business, then you've got to make sure that you can actually go out and get some customers and get some revenue coming in. But beyond a certain point, Julian, there gets the stage where actually you need to go from building the product to building the company that builds the product. And at this point is really the stage of kind of introspection and reflection to ask yourself, who are we? Is it who we want to be? And if so, how do we hold on to that as we scale? And I think the interesting thing for me is that when I left that business, I spent some time as a strategic advisor, and I would go into companies and I'd kind of sit at board level and I'd help with all manner of different things. The interesting thing is, because of my background in technology, often these were technology companies, and some of them were even selling an identical technology because they were reseller businesses. And the thing that struck me is that even though they were the same on the surface, they couldn't be more different when you walked in through their doors in terms of how they behaved, how the energy felt, how they made decisions, all of this type of stuff. And I started to realize that no matter the industry, 90% of what your company does is the same as everybody else. And so if you think about it, airlines will get people from A to B, and hotels will give you a bed for the night, and accountants will balance the books. But the real differentiator is in that remaining 10%, basically who the organization is. And I started to call that 10% a company's core difference. And it's the one thing that an organization has that no one else has, and that nobody will ever be able to copy, imitate, or steal. The big problem is that you have to get intentional about uncovering it and then preserving it as you grow.
I like that, and that comes down to people here. We're talking about, isn't it? That's the differential, isn't it? And people, how you operate, how you approach things, how you interact with your customers, your clients. It's often it's funny, isn't it? When you in business, it's not about the price that people are bothered about, and when you're in a negotiation, it's actually they're interested in how you're going to go about things, how you follow up, how you interact, what energy you bring to the table, to the organization. And that's what gets you the sale, gets you the business, isn't it? Rather than just price, because price obviously is just anybody can compete on price, but actually people bizarrely, do buy into people. And I think, are we talking the people and the cultural side of things? And I guess, does this come from your learnings of, if you went back again to your your own company, would you have put these things in place?
So if I break down the concept of core, C is customer, basically who are you for? O is origin, your backstory, where are you from? R is reason, your raison d'etre. So why do you exist? Why do you exist beyond making money? And then E is ethos, effectively, how do you behave? And so I think there's two parts to what you just said. The first is, in my previous company, the bit that was weak in that core model was our ethos, our culture. We hadn't defined who belonged and who didn't. We were actually really strong in terms of the customer that we were after, which enabled us to win business. And we were also really clear on telling our backstory and why we'd started. And so there is one attribute in that model that effectively made us fractured and unstable and limited our growth. And for me, Julian, it's when all four of those attributes are strong and explicit, then you've got the ultimate foundation for growth and protecting who you are as you scale.
So let's sort of pick off those sort of aspects of that sort of core sort of acronym. So obviously C is for customers, and what are sort of strategies have you seen work well for maintaining that sort of customer focus, that customer centric approach for an organization, and making sure everything they're doing is client centered, client solution focused approach?
I think first of all is actually understanding who is our ideal client. Now, I work with a lot of growth stage businesses. So typically they're kind of between 1 and 10 million in turnover, and maybe about 8 to kind of 80 people in size. And one of the major issues that I see time and time again is that who is your customer? Well, anyone, right? Literally, there is no distinguishing feature apart from the fact that if you're willing to pay, then we're happy to support you. And I see this as a massive challenge in terms of distinction and differentiation. Because if you appeal to everyone, then ultimately you end up appealing to no one. And even if you look at some of the biggest companies on the planet, I don't know, like take Facebook. They started, only kind of serving Harvard. It was for Harvard. You take Pinterest, it was kind of for Midwestern mums. You take Uber, it was for black cars in NYC, right? You always have to start. I think it's a guy at MIT that calls it a beachhead market, right? You have to start with a defined, clear beachhead. Now, for some companies, depending on your growth ambition, just staying within that beachhead is all maybe you ever need to do. But the big thing is that a lot of companies don't define it in the first place. They don't.
What do you think? What is it that, well, besides not defining it, obviously, why do you think organizations just set out there just to go and grab a load of customers? What's driving it? Is it they feel they can meet everybody's needs, or is it driven out of fear, out of scarcity mindset? What's driving that sense of, lack of focus? Because I know, when I started, I can coach anybody, and I can coach anybody. Clearly, I can, but I realized, and I'm not so obsessed about having niche, but I think you need to have a sense of focal point that you tend to have an expertise in, or a customer that you appeal to and they appeal to you, and that type of thing. And outside of that, you still get people come into your business. But I think it's really helpful, certainly from a marketing point of view. But what is it stops organizations doing that? Because that's the very first point to think about, isn't it? Who are our customers and how are we going to get to them?
I think you're right. For me, the common thing that I see is a fear. It's a fear of missing out. It's almost, if we say that we're for that, what if they come knocking? Like, if we say we're for that type of firm, what happens if Nike comes knocking? What happens if Coca-Cola comes knocking? And it's almost like, you just have to kind of like, now you flag to something and basically say, look, this is who we're for. This is who we understand. And interestingly, for me, there is a direct connection between your origin story, your backstory, and who you serve. Like, I think a lot of companies, Julian, make the mistake that when they tell their origin story, it's literally so self-focused that you don't actually understand who are they existing to benefit. So it's interesting for me because in a way, I'm benefiting my previous self. I wish that 15 years ago, I had access to this insight around the fact of here's where we're going wrong as an organization. And I didn't. And that's what I'm trying to put right. And so there is a direct correlation between my backstory and actually the customer that I'm in the market to serve.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, that is interesting. I think I'm similar, actually. I'm very similar in terms of my own backstory and why I became a coach and who I help and the reason I do the focus on resilience. Yeah, so there is actually a link to that. So that's an interesting insight, isn't it, to actually think about why you started. Might have very good clues of who you should serve, and the fact that you're now helping people that you wanted that help many years ago.
I'm
You're
trying
the
to
answer
help
to
my
it now.
former self. I'm trying to help
Yeah.
my former self. And I think, it will be, like you say, the same for you. Around resilience, there will be something in your backstory that actually makes resilience super important. There will be a trigger moment. There will be a catalyst moment in your backstory that actually makes this tale of resilience almost critical. And actually, it will also point to the type of organization or client or individual that you want to really help.
So talking about origin story, clearly it is important. But how does it contribute to team spirit? And also, is this just for people who've created the team? How does that become part of the wider team that went from 10, 50, 100 to 1,000 people? How do we ensure that that origin story is still having that impact, which obviously reflects in terms of what we do with our customers, but also the energy that it provides as well and the insights?
I think it provides an element of relatability and meaning. So if you look at any company that I think you feel personally connected to, you will know something about them, perhaps even their founder or founding team, more so than just the product that they create or the service that they offer. I think the key is that you want to make sure that you're telling a story that, like I say, is actually in some way connected to the customer that you're there to serve. And therefore, when you're bringing in team members, you're continuously telling and re-educating people on that story. And I think this is what gets lost. Like over time, as more team members are added, you kind of get to the point where people are going, so, yeah, what's so special here? Like, why are we here? What are we doing? And therefore, now we're linking into the idea of purpose and reason. Like, actually, what's the great fight that we're here to do? What's the wrong in the world that we're trying to put right? What's the enemy that we're trying to defeat? I love companies like Method, the kind of soap household cleaning brand. Like, they looked at the category back in the day when they started, and they came up with the idea that we are people against dirty. And it was actually dirty design because they believed that all of these kind of like cleaning product bottles are just ugly. So you actually hide them away under the sink. You don't want to put them on top of the sink. They're against dirty things, as in, well, yeah, we need to kind of like use a product here to actually clean our surfaces, but also dirty ingredients. Like, they believed that a lot of the things that were kind of going into these products were toxic. And so that purpose, that story, that audience that they were trying to serve, like, this just comes through in everything that they do. And it's not just their marketing and communications and, almost kind of customer centric storytelling. It's internally within the business as well.
So how do we keep origin stories alive that might be 10, even 50 years, 100 years old for when this company started? How do we keep that alive in an organization? How do we get people to be excited about it as like that company? What have you found in your experience is a good way of doing that?
I think you have to continuously tell it. And I think you also have to realize that perhaps that story, even though it could be one person or it could be a couple of people, that started the company, but continuously telling, if those people have moved on, continuously telling, well, what were they here to do? Why did this company that might now have 200 people, 500 people, 800 people, or more. Like, why did it matter? Why did it start? Like, what is this eternal kind of quest that we're on? I read something recently. I think it was I think Tim Cook was asked, like, what does he believe is his greatest achievement since obviously Steve Jobs passed and he took over? And he said, protecting the DNA of the company. Beyond anything else, beyond the market share, the market cap, anything else, you know, incredible achievement, but actually protecting the DNA of the company.
Because that's what propels it. That's what keeps it going. That's what keeps it focused. And that's what, as you say, attracts people to work there and the innovation they create, because everybody gets attached to the origin story, the reason, the purpose about it, isn't it? And that's what excites people. It's interesting. You see more like marketing now that's telling the story of the company. You know, for example, just, you know, not so much about the story, but like Warburton's talk about all the 5th generation bakers, and because then you get this relatability piece, don't you? You get, well, they're just normal people. They started as bakers, you know, whatever, how many years ago, and yes, they're a big brand and massive and Warburtons, but actually they just started as a baking bread. That's what they were doing, and it makes it relatable to customers and consumers, but also internally, isn't it? There's something nice about that. And even when, as you say, Steve Jobs, you know, has died, there's still, that guy's still trying to keep that DNA of what we're about alive, and that's telling stories. It's not putting purpose statements of it. It's actually telling stories, isn't it, and sharing people why we're here, what we're about.
I think there's nothing worse, Julian. The idea of purpose washing, and yeah, the statements on the wall, the mouse mat, the big rah-rah, and that everybody goes back to work the next day and nothing feels any different. Like, for me, the Big Bang approach never, ever works. And also, this isn't something that you create. This is something that you discover.
That's interesting.
And I think this is where a lot of this activity, like you mentioned, marketing, brand, right? That there are commonalities with what I'm talking about in terms of that marketing and brand category industry. But I think where people go wrong is they treat work like this as a creative endeavor rather than a discovery process. This isn't something that you create. This is something that you look inward and discover.
That's I like that perspective. That's a change. That's a turnaround, isn't it? Because I think we often create purpose statements, create culture, but actually discovering is more introspective. And so how would an organization might be listening to this right now, you know, small, medium or large, and they want to get back to that sort of purpose, being purposeful in that origin story. What sort of things could you help them with in terms of how to discover that as opposed to create that?
I think when I asked you earlier, like, you know, your whole almost category idea is this idea of building resilient teams. And I said to you, like, there's something in your history that makes this idea powerful for you. Now, you might not have connected the dots yet, but I would urge you, as I did, to kind of actually sit down, get quiet, and to think about, why does resilience matter to me so much? So there could be something that they're communicating, something that they're doing already that actually is the idea that shines brighter than any other idea that they've got in their business. And I would urge them as a founding team to go, why? Why does this speak to us? Or why do we treat customers in that way? Why do we design our offer in that way? What's the thing that we do that our competition would never dream of doing? And what's so fascinating, like you asked me right at the start, like, what's the most enjoyable part of your work? Like, it is genuinely saying to people, you realize you take that for granted, but no one else in your space would do something like that. And this tells me something, Julian, about who they are and what they stand for. And this goes beyond a product. This is actually at that core DNA of them as an organization. You mentioned culture just now. And I think this is the E in the core model, the ethos, which effectively is culture, like the way we make decisions, the way we behave. Culture for me seems to have it's a real popular buzzword at the moment. Like you look anywhere over LinkedIn and people are kind of spouting stuff about culture. Now I've studied this stuff for probably 12, 15 years. And I think the big challenge here is that we think, to your earlier point about purpose statements, it's as easy as, or just choose some values from this piece of paper. Just choose these values, and now we've got our values, and our values equal culture. So now we've defined our culture. And again, this is not a creative endeavor. This is a discovery exercise. So to your point about what can somebody do today, there are individuals within your organization that understand more about your culture than anybody else. Those are the people that have been there for 90 days or less. Those are the people that are understanding within your cultural environment, what are the rules of survival and emotional prosperity within this given team. To me, that's the ultimate definition of culture. Like if one of us went to prison, like we don't need someone to give us a culture book in the prison to understand the rules of survival and emotional prosperity. Like we're going to learn it really, really quick. And it's the same thing for people that have been in your company for 3 months or less, because they have their eyes wide open. They are seeing what's different here to anywhere else, and they are learning and adapting the basic rules to keep them safe or to actually get them rewarded.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Yes, prison. Yeah, that would be an interesting place. You'd see what is the culture. Well, you'd find out. It's interesting because talking about values. I do an exercise with teams or organizations where we discover values actually, rather than just come up with words and stuff. And I do an exercise where I say you're gonna send 5 or 6 people to Mars. Who people who represent who you are about, who observe the behaviors, they act, everything they embody who you are about, or you like to see as in your organization. And that starts to then discover they put the people up the room on the board, and then they say, well, what is it about these people? What have they got? And then values start to come out of that. So they're in some ways they're discovering it rather than creating it. They're already there, and that's a good way of, I guess, bringing it a bit more to life. And I think that is a challenge with all these things is, yes, it's good to have a purpose statement. It gives a little bit of a point and it gives a talking point, but it's how we, and even the origin story, it's how we sort of maintain it, but also use it in a way that brings it alive. Sort of, I remember talking to organizations where when they were struggling, if they were purpose driven or had a vision, go back to it and use it. And that to give you the energy, to give you insight, to give you the way to sort of stand back a little bit, lift your gaze from the current situation to what you're trying to do. That's how you use it. That's how you bring it alive. That's how you sort of incorporate it, because it's there for a reason, not just we've got a purpose statement now, we've got our values. Well, how do you do it? How do you champion values in your business? How do you reward it? How do you say, so-and-so's meeting our values, we're going to reward him for that? Or it's bringing things alive, isn't it? So what has been your experience of bringing all this alive, I think, and making sure it is an everyday occurrence and becomes part of that DNA of that organization?
I think first of all, it's key to understand that there's a lot of nuance in values. So the mistake I see people falling into is creating aspirational values. The values that they would love to be on a great day, rather than the values that they are today. So first of all, we have aspirational. I think we also then have, Julian, expected values. Like when you see like some of these kind of generic platitudes like integrity and honesty and customer success, you're like, would I ever actually want the opposite to be true? Like it's just bonkers to me. So expected values, just general decent human behavior, like this is going to do nothing to differentiate you. Nothing. I think also as companies scale, we have accidental values. So values which become part of the fabric and the operating system of the business, which actually were never intended to be there in the first place. You look at companies that have scaled. I think actually it's an interesting point. I think you can grow well, but scale badly. So in my last business, we grew well, we added customers, we added revenue. And if an accountant was purely looking at our business, they think we'd have a great business. But no, we scaled badly because actually internally we were rife with indecision and fracture and complication and disagreement, and we just weren't aligned. And that slowed down performance. And there was a lot of accidental values which were taking place there. I think Wells Fargo a few years ago had a major issue with poor behavior, again, linked to kind of accidental values, because on one hand, they wanted to drive sales performance, but that ended up creating a behavior in its sales people, which resulted in them like opening accounts for people that had died and this, that, and the other just to hit sales performance targets. Like it's crazy. But the most important value is non-negotiable. So when you do your exercise and you're basically saying, right, what are the 4 or 5 people that we'd send off to another planet, and what are the attributes of those individuals that make them a great representation of the ideal person that fits and belongs within your company? The key for me is if you're documenting those traits and characteristics, values, which are the ones where if somebody didn't live up to it, would you immediately fire someone? They have to be non-negotiable. So getting back to your point then about the idea of how do we preserve and protect as we scale, another massive mistake that people fall into is who they name manager. So who you name manager is basically the quickest way to decay and destroy your organizational spirit and culture. If you haven't actually understood what are the attributes, the great cultural attributes of somebody to become a leader within his business.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Definitely agree. I think there's obviously a danger and almost an acceptance that somebody's got very technical skills and gets promoted and then becomes a leader, and they lack, cultural awareness, poor management skills, leadership skills, people skills, and can destroy a team quite quickly because they're just not, what the company is about. But they're very technically good or very exceptional in that sense. Just one sort of final question, really. Just looking ahead, or even now, really, how do you see the challenge of maintaining that organizational spirit evolving in the sort of future of work, with hybrid remote working and the challenges that brings?
That is a great question. I think the issue that we face today is a misunderstanding of what a culture is. When I talk to people that are suffering because they aren't meeting together in one central place, we had a great culture. Oh, our culture's gone now. Your culture isn't gone because you still make decisions as a business. Like if the definition of culture is the rules of survival and emotional prosperity, well, actually, the office doesn't matter. You just need to think differently now. Like decisions might have been made in the office. Behavior might have been learned through osmosis in the office. But how you now scale it and protect it means that you just need to get more explicit about documenting it. Like the idea that you don't have a culture because you're not going to a physical space, to me, is ludicrous. What we actually need to be thinking is, what is the purpose of the office in 2024 and beyond? Like I think I read recently, like I think it's Amazon. Is it Amazon? That are asking, basically it is a complete blanket return to office policy. You must come in. To me, this is crazy. This is utterly crazy. Because at the end of the day, all that people want to understand, Julian, is what is the purpose of me going to the office today for? If the purpose of me going to the office today is just so I can be watched by superiors because they don't trust me at home, you've got a bigger problem. You've got a bigger problem. Whereas the great companies that I see, the great clients that I work with, they're just reimagining what the idea of an office is. So actually we go there because we want to foster communication and collaboration. So we have more whiteboards, we have more team space, we have more whatever. Because when we come there, it is literally for a specific idea or creative generation session. That's what we want to do in the office. If you literally go to the office to sit at a desk and go on to Zoom calls in exactly the same way that you do and can do at home, you are literally just going to piss people off and they're going to leave.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it is Amazon. Amazon are forcing everybody to come back. And I think it's, there's a trust issue with all that was going on, but also I think there's a laziness perception that actually we get it back in the office, we'll get the culture back again. It's that mindset, and it's like it doesn't work that way. And I think they think it'll fix our culture or fix our how it is, and it won't. As you say, the core thing, it doesn't matter how whether you have an office or not, you can still have a great culture in an organization, and having a reason for people, as you say, coming to the office for collaboration and interaction, which is obviously vital. It's important to meet. There's nothing wrong with in-person stuff. Of course it's not. But I think they've got to think a bit more hard about it. And obviously people are making choices, and there's organizations out there now are offering hybrid remotes, and it's becoming even more competitive in the context of talent recruitment. I've really enjoyed our insights, or the insights you've shared, Mark, and made me think, and it's great. I always like talking to you because you always make me think. I like people who make me think, and I have to sort of mull over things. But yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope people have enjoyed this as well. If people want to connect and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
MarkSampson.com, MarkSampson.com. I'm trying to get better, Julian, at LinkedIn, right? So I would say, please come and connect with me on LinkedIn, but I'm definitely nowhere near your standard at actually posting and creating. But it's a pledge to myself where I'm trying to improve.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Julian.